So when we left off in chapter 13, Granny was telling Ben about her lifetime of crime. And so we're in chapter 14 now, Nosy Neighbor. Ben couldn't help himself, and his eyes darted towards the window. For a brief moment, he saw a dark figure wearing a strange hat peer through the dirty glass and then quickly disappear out of view. "There's a man peering in that window," said Ben breathlessly. "I know," said Granny. "I told you not to look." "Shall I go out and see who it was?" said Ben, trying to hide the fact that he was more than a little frightened. Really, he wanted Granny to go out and see who it was. "I bet it was my nosy neighbor, Mr. Parker. He lives at number 7. He always wears a pork pie hat and keeps spying on me." "Why?" asked Ben. Granny shrugged. "I don't know. I imagine he has a rather cold head or something." "What?" said Ben. "Oh, no, not his hat. I mean, why does he keep spying on you?" "He's a retired major, and now he runs the neighborhood watch scheme in gray clothes." "What's neighborhood watch?" asked Ben. "It's a group of local people who keep an eye out for burglars. But Mr. Parker just uses it as an excuse to spy on everyone. The nosy old git. I often come back from the supermarket with my bag of cabbages and see he's hiding behind his net curtain spying on me with a pair of binoculars." "Is he suspicious about you?" said Ben, more than a little panicked. He didn't want to be thrown in jail for aiding and abetting a criminal. He didn't really know what abetting meant actually, but he knew it was a crime, and he knew he was too young for prison. "He's suspicious about everyone. We have to keep an eye out for him, young lad. The man is a menace." Ben went over to the window and peered out. He couldn't see anyone. Bring! Ben's heart missed a beat. It was only the doorbell, but if they let Mr. Parker inside, he would see all the evidence the police would need to send Ben and his granny straight to prison. "Don't answer it," said Ben as he ran to the middle of the room and started stuffing all the jewels back in the tin as quickly as he could. "What do you mean, don't answer it? He knows I'm at home. He just saw us through the window. You answer the door and I will hide the jewels." "Me?" "Yes, you. Hurry." Ba-ding! The ring was more insistent. Mr. Parker had left his finger on the buzzer for even longer. Ben took a deep breath and walked calmly through the hall to the front door. He opened it. Outside stood a man in a very silly hat. Don't believe me? This is how silly the hat was. "Yes," said Ben in a squeaky high voice. "Can I help you?" Mr. Parker put his foot inside the bungalow so the front door couldn't be closed on him. "Who are you?" he barked nasally. He had a very big nose, which made him seem even nosier than he was. And he already seemed extremely nosy. Because he had a big nose, he also had a very nasal voice, which made everything he said, however serious, seem a little bit absurd. But his eyes shone red like a demon. "I'm Granny's friend," sputtered Ben. Why did I say that, he thought. In truth, he was in a terrible panic, and his tongue was running away with him. "Friend?" snarled Mr. Parker, pushing open the front door. He was stronger than Ben, and soon forced his way inside. "I mean grandson, Mr. Parker, sir," said Ben, retreating back towards the living room. "Why are you lying to me?" he said, taking several paces forward as Ben took several paces back. It was as if they were dancing the tango. "I am not lying," cried Ben. They reached the living room door. "You can't go in there," yelled Ben, thinking of the jewels still scattered all over the carpet. "Why not?" Because Granny's doing her naked yoga." Ben needed a dramatic excuse to stop Mr. Parker from barging through the door and seeing the jewels. He was pretty sure he had hit the jackpot as Mr. Parker paused and furrowed his brow. Sadly, the nosy neighbor was not convinced. "Naked yoga? A likely story. I need to talk to your grandmother right away. Now get out of my way, you nasty little worm of a boy." he said as he shoved the boy aside and opened the living room door. Granny must have heard Ben through the door because when Mr. Parker burst into the room, she was standing in her bra and knickers in a tree pose. "Mr. Parker, do you mind?" said Granny in mock horror that he had seen her in a state of undress. And I hate to show this to you, but if I have to see it, you have to see it. Mr. Parker's eyes spun around the room. He didn't know where to look, so he fixed his glare on the now bare carpet. "Excuse me, madam, but I need to ask you, where are those jewels I saw a moment ago?" Ben spied the silver Jubilee biscuit tin poking out from under the sofa. He edged it out of view with his foot. "What jewels, Mr. Parker? Have you been spying on me again?" demanded Granny, still in her underwear. "Well, he sputtered. "I had good reason. I was suspicious when I saw a young gentleman enter your property. I thought he might be a burglar. I let him in through the front door. He might have been a very charming burglar. He might have weaseled his way into your confidence. He's my grandson. He stays every Friday night." "Ah," said Mr. Parker triumphantly. "But it's not Friday night, so you can see why my suspicions were raised. And as head of Gray Clothes Neighborhood Watch, I must report anything suspicious I see to the police." "I've got a good mind to report you to the police, Mr. Parker," said Ben. Granny looked at him curiously. "Whatever for?" said the man, his eyes narrowed. They were now so red it was like there was a fire in his brain. "For spying on old ladies in their underwear," said Ben triumphantly. Granny winked at Ben. "She was fully clothed when I looked through the window," protested Mr. Parker. "That's what they all say," said Granny. "Now get out of my house before you are arrested for being a peeping Tom." "You've not heard the last of me. Good day," said Mr. Parker. With that, he spun on his heels and left the room. Granny and Ben heard the front door slam behind him, and they ran over to the window and watched him scuttle back to his bungalow. "I think we frightened him off," said Ben. "But he'll be back," said Granny. "We have to be very careful." "Yes," said Ben, more than a little alarmed. "We better hide the tin somewhere else." Granny thought for a moment. "Yes, I'll put it under the floorboards." "Okay," said Ben, "but first." "Yes, Ben." "You might want to get dressed." And that brings us to Chapter 5, Reckless and Thrilling. When Granny put her clothes back on, she and Ben sat down on the sofa. "Granny, before Parker turned up, you were telling me there was one jewel that you never stole," Ben whispered. There is something quite special that every great thief in the world would love to get their hands on, but it's impossible. It just can't be done." "I bet you could do it, Granny. You're the greatest thief the world has ever known." "Thank you, Ben. Perhaps I am, or rather was. And stealing these particular jewels might be every great thief's dream, but it will just be, well, impossible." "Jewels? There's more than one?" "Yes, my dear. The last time anyone tried to steal them, was 300 years ago. A Captain Blood, I believe. And I'm not sure the Queen would be pleased." She chuckled. "You don't mean the crown jewels?" "Yes, my boy." Ben had learned about the crown jewels in a history lesson at school. History was one of the few subjects he liked, mainly because of all the gory punishments they used to have in the olden days. Hanged, drawn, and quartered were his absolute favorite, but he also liked the breaking wheel, being burned at the stake, and of course, red hot poker up the bum. Who doesn't? At school, Ben had learned that the crown jewels were in fact a set of crowns, swords, scepters, rings, bracelets, and orbs, some of which were nearly 1,000 years old. They were used when a new king or queen was crowned, and since 1303, the year, not the time, they had been kept under lock and key in the Tower of London. Ben had begged his parents to take him to see them, but they had mauled that London was too far away, even though it wasn't that far. To be honest, they never really went anywhere as a family. When he was younger, Ben used to listen in silent wonder to his classmates as they recounted their mired adventures in show and tells, trips to the seaside, visits to museums, even holidays abroad. The knot in his stomach would tighten when his turn came. He was too embarrassed to admit that all he had done during the holidays was eat microwavable meals and watch TV. So he would make up stories about flying kites and climbing trees and exploring castles. But now he had the greatest show and tell of all time. His granny was an international jewel thief, a gangster. Except if he showed or told this, the old dear would be put in prison and they would throw away the key. Ben realized that this was his big chance to do something crazy and reckless and thrilling. I can help you, he said. I can help you, said Ben in a cool and calm manner, though his heart was beating faster than ever. Help me do what? Replied the old lady, a little befuddled. Steal the crown jewels, of course, said Ben. And that brings us to the end of chapter 15.